Well, it's that time again. I can't believe it, but we are halfway through the calendar year, and it's time to list my personal rankings of the best and worst movies of the year for 2019 so far. Now, this will be split into two videos, and I will cover my top 10 best movies in this video with my top 5 worst movies to follow in a second video, just for the sake of time. Overall, this was a hard list to create, to find 10 movies to list as my best movies of the year so far. And it's kind of sad to say that the list for my 5 worst movies that I've seen was a lot easier to come up with. Now, disclaimer, I've seen just under 20 movies this year so far, so in order to give you a top 10 best list, I'm having to limit my worst list to just 5 since I wouldn't have 10 exactly. It's been a very okay or pretty good sort of year for films, with many of them falling somewhere in the middle, or just barely above that, and not many of them have been true winners. And with that in mind, my lower numbered films in my top 10 ranking definitely fall somewhere in the middle for me, and I won't be the least bit surprised to eventually see them replaced by better movies still to come out the rest of this year. But for now, there will be a couple just okay movies that will make my top 10 list right now so far by default. But we certainly do have a few exceptions that I am excited to showcase, but for the most part, it's been a softer year so far when it comes to the quality of movies that have been released, and I can only hope that the latter half of the year will be better. We do have some heavy hitters still to see in the coming months, and not to mention awards season is also fast approaching, so one can only hope that Hollywood is saving the best for the latter half of this year. So no more stalling, let's get started on my list on what I consider to be the top 10 best / my top 10 favorite movies of the year so far. And in the number 10 spot, barely made it, but we have Aladdin. I definitely had a lot of issues with this movie, but it kind of met my expectations for the most part, and exceeded my expectations in a couple areas. This is gonna be one of those movies that I can almost guarantee is not going to be on my top 10 list by the end of the year. But when you mix nostalgia with the colors and the music, I can enjoy this movie for what it is as long as I turn my brain off. It's a very light, easy movie to watch, and I'm sure I'll see it again. So for right now, I'll list it in my number 10 spot. In my number 9 spot, we have Yesterday, and this movie was cute, it was charming. I didn't do a full review of it. It could have been a lot better than it was, but with Lily James being enchanting in no matter whatever film she is, this movie was overall pleasant. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it definitely wasn't a waste of time, and it had some really, really charming moments. And at number 8, we have Captain Marvel. I enjoyed this movie overall. There are a few, narrative issues, a few storytelling issues that I have, but I enjoy it with repeat viewings even a little bit more. I like Brie Larson in the role, and I had a pretty good time with this movie. In my number 7 spot, we have Shazam. Now, Captain Marvel and Shazam were kind of neck and neck for the longest part, and Shazam just barely beat out Captain Marvel for me, simply based off of Zachary Levi as Shazam. He completely stole the movie, and also the movie was incredibly heartfelt, but also very, very funny, and I really loved the villain in the movie, played by Mark Strong. Based on those elements alone, I felt like it had an edge on Captain Marvel for me personally, even though I enjoyed the both of them, and they were almost equal for the longest time. In my number 6 spot, we have Godzilla, King of the Monsters. This was a surprise for me. I went in with low expectations. I know that the critic reviews were pretty lackluster, but honestly, I thought the 2014 Godzilla, which this one is a sequel to, I thought the 2014 version was a little bit underwhelming, honestly. And I rewatched it again recently in preparation for this newest Godzilla. And I gotta say, this newest Godzilla was a lot more fun than I was expecting. I compared it to a classic 1990s family-friendly action-adventure flick without any real genius writing elements or groundbreaking acting showcases, but it was just a fun time in the theater. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time with the monsters and everything. It surprised me. I thought it was thrilling. I didn't go in expecting anything amazing, and I actually walked out having a really good time with it. So that's why it's in my number 6 spot. In my number 5 spot, we have Avengers Endgame. Now, this movie, continues to be less and less perfect the more and more I watch it. Unfortunately, there are some issues I do have with certain narrative developments that kind of grow and escalate the more and more I see it. However, I do have to give credit where credit is due for all of these years, all of the series of Marvel movies leading up to this, with it being a grand finale for many of the characters, especially with the standout performances for me by Robert Downey Jr. This movie overall, I give major credit for everything they have accomplished with all of the pieces, all of the actors, and it made for a great time at the cinema. It still is not the best Marvel movie in my eyes, but the pros definitely outweigh the cons, and I have to give credit where credit is due. In my number 4 spot, we have Late Night. This movie was incredibly charming. It wasn't quite as funny as I was anticipating it, but it's definitely a showcase piece for Emma Thompson. This is the best I've seen her in a very, very long time. It's definitely her film, I argue. Mindy Kaling had a hand writing it, but they definitely gave a lot more to Emma Thompson in terms of character development and character showcase. Overall, I really liked their dynamic. I liked how this film presented itself. I didn't think it was perfect. I thought it could have been a little bit funnier. But overall, I thought it was incredibly lovable, and I appreciated what they presented, and I definitely appreciated what Emma Thompson brought. And in my number 3 spot, we have Long Shot. This was a movie that I didn't have a whole lot of high expectations for, but it looked pretty cute. But romantic comedies just simply are not what they used to be these days. So, going in with that mindset, I was very, very pleasantly surprised by Long Shot. I thought that Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen had fantastic chemistry, and there were elements of this movie that reminded me of the good and great romantic comedies that we don't see all that often anymore. I thought this movie was really funny, well-paced, great 2 leads, and I completely bought into it, and I really enjoyed the hell out of everything, and I can't wait to see it again. And in my number 2 spot, we have Toy Story 4. I have said this before in my review of it, but I'll say it again. This was a triumphant new chapter to the Toy Story franchise that surprised me in ways that I did not think were possible anymore for these characters. It made me cry. It made me laugh. The animation was breathtaking, and I've already seen it twice since it was in theater, and I will give so much praise and will continue to give so much praise to the creative teams that were able to expand upon the Toy Story series in ways that we didn't think were possible. I really, really loved Toy Story 4, and it earned a place in my heart, and definitely, rightfully, has earned my number 2 spot so far for this year. And in my number 1 spot, my favorite movie of 2019 so far for this year is, without a doubt, Booksmart. This movie needs to be seen. It needs more exposure. I think that's the most heartbreaking thing about this movie is the lack of exposure that it has gotten, or more so, a softer amount of people who have seen it, and people need to see it. This movie is fucking hilarious, with 2 amazing leads, a very smart script, great pacing, so many surprises. This is a gem of a film that completely knocked me over the head, and I cannot wait to see it over and over again. It's a very quotable film. It's a masterful directorial debut by Olivia Wilde. I cannot talk up this film enough. You need to go see Booksmart if you haven't already. And that's my top 10 list for you. I'm sure this could stir a little bit of controversy between a few of my lists. There were some films that I loved that others didn't, and some films that I didn't love that might be your favorite. Everyone's different, there's no shame in that. I'm curious to know what your favorites have been this year so far, and I'm only excited as to what else is in store for the rest of this year for cinema. And keep a lookout for my next video listing my top 5 worst movies of the year so far. And that's all I have for you right now. So thank you all again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Ryan Boehme, signing off. Bye everyone.